Hello and welcome to our NetBackup APIs and Enabling Automation session. My name is Anthony Cusimano. I'm a solutions evangelist here at Veritas. I'm so excited for you guys to get to watch this next session. It's going to be hosted by one of my all-time favorite people at Veritas, Mr. Mark Coletta himself. He is an API expert. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic right over to him so he can tell you a little bit more about the cool stuff we're doing with APIs.
So let's talk about our agenda, what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to provide an overview of the NetBackup APIs. And then we're going to go through some examples of API workflows that you can use in your environment. And we're going to do a demo of how you can actually apply these APIs. So let's first go ahead and cover an overview. So what's the problem that customers are experiencing? So organizations are looking to collaborate and integrate their IT DevOps teams. And this is really about increasing delivery and productivity for the entire organization. And those IT organizations are looking to accelerate their ITaaS as a delivery. And this is around being able to create self-service portals for their customers, having policy-based provisioning, or if you have single, multi, or hybrid cloud environments, enabling lifecycle management so you know what's exactly happening within those cloud infrastructures. And finally, organizations are looking to streamline their business processes and workflows. And this is really about creating automation that reduces costs for the overall IT org. So when it comes back to the NetBackup APIs, what are they? How do they work? So first, we are built on a RESTful architecture, and that is the most widely used style for creating APIs. We use a JSON formatted message for both the response and for the task. And finally, we have an API client-server relationship where you use an API client, for instance, such as Postman, that will send a request to NetBackup. The NetBackup server will process that request and then return a value. That could be a status code, for instance, or it could be the output of a command. For instance, if you do a get command, it'll give you all of that output. So one of the biggest questions we receive about our API infrastructure is, what about security? That's our biggest threat in our environment, making sure everything is secure. So we use two types of security with the NetBackup APIs. First, it's authentication. And what we have is we have a JSON web token that passes a user ID, or if you pre-created an API key for a user or system, we'll use an API key. And that authentication then says if you're allowed to do something. Well, once that happens, we then authorize that user to perform certain tasks. And this is based upon a persona or a principal for that person or that system. It could be, for instance, a workload admin or the NetBackup admin or a security admin. Well, once we've done that authentication authorization, then the APIs, before you can actually execute, will check those permissions. And in some situations, you may have to have authorization as part of multiple principal roles. So when we talk about what's our breadth of coverage of APIs for NetBackup. So in NetBackup 9.0, we have approximately 500 APIs that can be used for different situations. It covers the gambit of the product. So when you look at systems management, for instance, we have managed storage, managed cloud. When it comes to protection, you can create protection plans. You can modify protection plans. You can also do traditional policy management if that's what you have within your environment. When it comes to configuration management, you can do things like setting up event and alert management. You can manage Microsoft SQL and AG databases and file groups, or you could do things like setting resource limits for VMware. And then finally, when it comes to security, because that is one of the biggest areas of concern for customers, we do have the authentication that I already mentioned and the authorization. You can also set up RBAC for the rest of NetBackup, as well as you can set up things like key management for external KMS. So a lot of customers ask, well, where do I find out more information about the APIs that NetBackup has? So if you go to veritas.com/solution/API, there's an API portal. And from there, there's links and a ton of information available to you. For instance, you can go to sort directly from there, and that's where all the documentation for our APIs exist. You can go to our GitHub site, and there you'll find examples of different API workflows that are available. And if you're building those types of workflows within your environment, you can contribute to our GitHub site, and that way other customers can enjoy the experience that you've created as well. Additionally, with every NetBackup master server starting at 8.2, we include a Swagger interface. And that's the example that you see over on the right-hand side of your screen. In there, you can drill into all the available APIs. You can utilize those APIs, but I will caution, if you're not familiar with it, if you perform a function, it will go directly against your NetBackup server. So if you do a delete, it will delete whatever you're requesting to be done. And then finally, for those people that are really new to APIs and how NetBackup utilizes those APIs, we have videos available both on YouTube and Vox. They explain a lot about the documentation, for instance, how Swagger works, how our API users are set up, and the RBAC controls that you can place against those APIs. All right, now let's run through a few example scenarios of how you can utilize our APIs, and then we'll go ahead and do a demo. So let's start by first looking at a very, very common automation scenario that customers are looking to do. It's creating a backup policy, one of the most simplest things we need to do within NetBackup to start protection. So let's say I'm an API user, or I could be a remote system, for instance, Ansible. I first want to create a policy. Well, our API of post, which is a create option, then /config/policy, and you give it all the variables, and we'll go through this as part of our demo. We actually show you this. You can create the policy. If you want to check a policy, you could go ahead and then run a get against that policy name, and that will return all the values that you set up within that policy type. When you're ready, you can instantiate a NetBackup manual backup running a post admin /manual-backup, and that will go ahead and kick off that job. You will need to provide, of course, the policy name, the client name, and the type of schedule, but it will kick that off for you. And then finally, you can go get the status of your job by doing a admin jobs, and that'll tell you exactly what the status, if it completed, if it failed, or if it's still in process. So now we can move on to something that's a little bit more complicated than a basic backup. We're going to configure a VMware server, and we're going to create a restore point using our instant access. And this actual workflow we actually have built into NetBackup. So when you first log into the web UI, starting with NetBackup 8.3, you'll see a getting started wizard. That getting started wizard is actually this workflow where it step-by-step takes you how to build out, do a discovery against VMware, add it to a protection plan, and then run the protection. So, as I mentioned, the first thing we'd want to do is configure our VMware environment. So we'd add our credentials, we'd verify the discovery, and then we'd find a VM that we want to go ahead and protect. We could then add a storage unit, and in this case, of course, we want to use instant access because we're going to be able to want to recover that data immediately and go ahead and start manipulating it. Then we create our protection plan, and we subscribe that VM that we found to that protection plan. Once we're done with that, we want to, of course, protect that. So we're going to run a backup now. This is very, very similar to a manual backup. However, backup now is for protection planned assets. And then we can go ahead and get the status of the backup job. At that point, this system is protected. But let's say we want to get to the point where we want to recover that. So first thing we'd have to do is let's find the backup ID. So we'd go ahead and do a get operation to get that. And then we'd do the details so that we can figure out how we want to restore this. Next, we'd go ahead and create the instant access point for the restore, and then we'd get the details. And that gives us all of our information about what occurred within that environment, what files are available, what SQL databases, for instance, are available. And then once we're ready, we can then go ahead and clean that up and perform the delete operations. So this is a very complex workflow, but it's all fully doable with NetBackup APIs. Next, this is an additional same basic workflow, same basic automation. The only difference, if you'll notice that red box down in the bottom left, is instead of doing a single VM, we can do this against an entire VM group. And then when we go to do our recovery, we can select just a specific VM from that intelligent group. Now we're going to talk a little about how our demo environment's set up. So first, we're going to have a demo where I'm using my Mac workstation. I'm going to use an application called Postman, and I'm going to create a basic policy, very, very similar to what we did as part of the workflow automation demonstration or demonstrations I just spoke of. Then we're going to go ahead and log on to our master server. And from there, we're going to use a PowerShell script because it is a Windows master, a PowerShell script to create exclude lists for our client. And not only could it be done for one client, we could, for instance, read in an array and do it for multiple clients. And then finally, we're going to use an Ansible server running on CentOS that's going to create a workflow where we're going to build a policy and then run that manual backup. So exactly what we talked about in those possible creations we did earlier. So in the first example, we are going to run some APIs remotely using, as I mentioned, my Mac workstation. We're going to use Postman, and the Postman application allows us to run remote API calls against the master server. I've created essentially a workflow here, which is basically can create a policy, run a manual backup, and then get the jobs. I could run this serially if I go in to run this, and it'll run all of these in parallel in a complete workflow. But in this situation, I'm going to demonstrate just how to run just one of the single APIs. So to give you a bit of a walkthrough of what we're going to do, we're going to do a post operation. So essentially, we're going to tell the computer to go create something for us, and we're going to run that against the NetBackup config policies. A little bit of additional information. We do have to set up some variables here. We do this across all of the examples that I'll be giving, but I'll show you kind of quickly what they look like. First, we set the context type, which basically tells NetBackup how to interpret the API that's going to be called against it. I also am using an API key, and I talked about that in the presentation about the two ways you can authenticate yourself. In this situation, I'm going to be using an API key. And then I'm going to send the body, which is the body is what the actual content of the creation is going to happen to create this policy. So in this situation, I'm going to run a post on the policy. I'm going to create a new policy called Windows 2. And in here, I set a bunch of variables, things like I set my storage unit to MSDP stew, I turn on accelerator. But one thing that I am doing here is I am going to set this policy to deactive. So active, set it to false. So that way it won't run any jobs. I set my clients, and then I go through and I set all of my schedules. So it sets up the full and incrementals, and finally sets up backup selection. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and execute this against the master server by hitting a send. And this is going to then post that to the master, and we're going to get a status code return. In this case, we should be looking for a status code 204, which I get, which is located right here. And that tells me essentially this was a successful operation. And then if I go ahead and I jump over to my NetBackup master server, for those of you that haven't seen the web UI, this is what it looks like. We do have policies within policy creation. So you'll see I have two policies. The first one is Windows, which I already had created. Here's the new Windows 2 policy that I just created. And you can go through here and see that it sets up all the information. Here's my storage unit. It sets up my accelerator. I can look at my different schedules. Those were all fully built out. I have my client and I have my backup selections. So really simple way, I just ran a simple one item API call to create a policy. And like I said, I could have then put this into a series and executed a full backup against it, then went and took a look at what the job ID was. So pretty simple process. So now let's get into something where we're using a couple of different APIs. And for this one, I'm actually going to do a PowerShell operation. And to give you a little bit more detail before I start, I'm going to basically going to set up an exclude list or update an exclude list on the master server here, which is a Windows host. So if I open that up and we take a look at the excludes, you can see that it's the basic that comes with any basic Windows. But if I take a look at my PowerShell script, basically this is going to log in with a user ID and password this time. So we're not going to use an authorization key. I'm going to use an actual domain user ID and password. And it's basically going to log in to the master server. It's going to get a listing of the current exclude list for this Windows client. In this case, I'm only going to pass the single client. I could put in an array of clients and get multiple back, and then I could update hundreds of clients all at the same time. But basically, it's going to look, and if it doesn't see this test 0 and test 1, it's going to update that exclude list. Okay. So let's go ahead and we're going to run this within the PowerShell itself. So you'll see that it goes in, it's going to log in to the web services with my user ID and password that I provided in the string. It goes out, it gets the list of the current exclude list, checks, doesn't have the test 0 or test 1, and then updates that within the exclude list. So now if I jump back over here into my Java GUI, I take a look into the exclude list, you now see test 0 and test 1 are here. So we're able to update this one client very, very quickly. Like I said, if we would have passed an array into the client list here, I could have updated 1, 10, 100 clients all at one time. Okay. So now for our final use of APIs, we're going to use Ansible. And within this Ansible, we're going to create a third policy type. So I'm going to jump over to my Ansible server. And what we're going to do is we're going to first just take a look at the Ansible YAML file itself. So this one is called create policy with full. And basically, as I mentioned before, we're going to set up some variables like we did with Postman. We have our authorization, which is my API key. I pass where my master server is, so that's the remote master server that I'm going to run this against. I'm going to create a Windows 3 policy. It's going to look very similar. The only difference here is I'm going to set the policy type or the policy activation to true, so it's going to be an active policy. And then I do the same basic thing. I set up my storage unit, I set up accelerator, I add the client list and all schedules. And then, of course, the backup selections. Once that is complete, and it'll actually return us the same status code 204, which is one of the things we look for in the response here, then we're going to run a second operation, which is going to be a manual backup. Again, we set the site, we say it's a post operation. In this situation, the status code 202, that'll tell me that was successfully initiated. And I give it all the backup, full backup information. So backup Windows 3 full, and here's the client list. To run this, we're going to run an Ansible-playbook. We're going to give it the name of the YAML file. And in this situation, I'm going to give this verbosity of 3, so VVV. And this is just basically going to display the exact information to the screen as the operation occurs. So let's go ahead and execute this. Takes just a minute to run, and then we'll step back through and take a look at the actual operations that occurred. Okay, so we see here that 3 operations were successful, the OK3 here. So let's take a look at each one of those operations just to kind of walk you through it. So here's where we started the operation, started the Ansible playbook. And basically it goes through, and the first task it does is it gets some basic information to run in and of itself. So that way it's setting up different local temp directory information for it to run. The next task is to create the policy. And here you can see all of the information that is being sent as part of the JSON packet is within the body of this information. So we can see it has a policy of Windows 3, it's a Microsoft Windows policy, and it gives all of the information on the schedules and everything like that. So all of that gets passed. We get the status code 204 again, which is right here. So we're able to then continue to the next step, which is run the manual backup. And here, again, you can see the same information. Here's the JSON packet, the body of it, saying run a full backup of Windows 3 with this client name. It executes that operation. We get a status code 202 for successfully executed, and our playbook is complete. Now, if we jump back over to the master server, we can take a look. We have a Windows 3 policy now created. We can take a look at the attributes, schedules, the client's selections. And then, of course, we did the third operation, which was to run a manual backup. You can see right here, this is job 26. It was a full backup of Windows 3 or Win3. And then we can drill into this. And if we take a look at the backup type, this was an immediate backup. So this was the full backup that we actually executed. It wasn't run via schedule. And you can click into the details and you can see all the information of the backup starting, setting the storage units, setting accelerator, and then finally we get the successfully completed the backup. So that's 3 different ways that you can use APIs to automate workflows within NetBackup. And now we're available for Q&A.
Thank you, Mark. That was a fantastic session. We do have some questions, and also we had the poll as well. And I encourage everyone to fill out that poll if you can. That information helps us help you. So do you want to address the first question that came in? Mark, is there an easy way to query the oldest and newest backup image for a client, or listing all the clients in the catalog?
Sure. So there's a couple places that you probably need to go to get the correct information you're looking for. First, we have within the policies API area of the product, you can go do a list of all of the unique clients within specific policies. You will probably need to pull it like that just so that you can refine exactly what you're looking for. You don't get like 10,000 clients. When looking for images, you probably need to go over to the catalogs API, and there's a way you can query by client name and see the different images that are available.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. That's super helpful. A question that I actually had for you was a little bit more about the community. How can folks who saw what you presented today get a little bit more involved in the work that we're doing with APIs, as well as just the conversation in general?
Absolutely. So there are a couple places really that you could start with. First and foremost, go to Vox. We actually have some of our engineers that monitor our Vox chat sessions. So if you go into Vox, you ask a question about APIs, we do have some of our really critical SMEs, technical SMEs, that will answer those questions. And if you don't get an answer right away, I tend to go in there and look, and I can get it to the right person. Additionally, as I mentioned, we have that GitHub site. Highly recommend, if you're looking at doing APIs, you're looking at creating workflows, you want to contribute workflows that you've built, please go pull information from our GitHub site, register, and you can start contributing and helping other customers, as well as that's where we post some of our examples.
And I have just posted links to both of those in our live chat. There was also a question about reference links from the slide deck. Mark, if they want to learn more about any of the references, things we showed today, where could they go for that kind of information?
So we could probably post them perhaps in the chat, or we can perhaps make them available through the platform. We'll look into that. I don't have the exact answer for that, but I'll look into see if we can make that happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think that's all the questions we had coming in. So thank you again for your time today, Mark. This was absolutely fantastic and super educational.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it. Hope everyone learned something. Also, if you have any questions, you want to connect with me, I am available via the platform. You can go take a look at my contact information, send me an email. We can connect up. And if you need any assistance, we can go that route.
All right. Thanks again, and have a great event, everyone.